I think we're going to go ahead and get started, and people will probably still trickle in. But hi, I'm Dalva Church. For those of you who don't know me, Executive Director of the Museum, and we are so thrilled to welcome you here today. And we are also very thrilled to have this talk on the Garry Oak, which is a central part of Whidbey Island's ecosystem. We want to thank our sponsors before we get started, EB's Landing and the Friends of EB's, and our sponsor today is Scenic Isle Farm, so just to shout out to them as well. And also I believe we have a few little baby trees here for sale for those of you who are interested at the end of the program. So, all right.
Are they deer proof?
No. You have to do the deer proofing yourself. So yeah, relax and enjoy. And thank you so much for coming.
Hello, my name's Lee Roof, and in my former life I didn't take care of trees, I took care of people. But lately I've been interested in the natural world around us a little bit more, and I've joined the Oak Harbor Garry Oak Society. It's a group of people, most of them are in the Oak Harbor area, who are made it their goal to try to help recover the Garry Oak, which is endemic, used to be endemic to this area around Western Washington. First of all, I'll talk a little bit about oak trees in general. In the world, there are over 500 species of oak tree. And most of these oak trees are in the northern hemisphere. A lot of them are in the North America, from Mexico to Canada. Across southern Europe, you don't see many going up into Scandinavia, but southern Europe, across the Middle East, southern Asia, India, that area. And interestingly, there's some all the way down to Indonesia. There are none in Australia, none in northern Asia, and none in Africa, and none in South America. So it's how that all happened, nobody knows, but it's kind of interesting. In the United States alone, there are 90 species. So 90 species of oak tree in the United States. And we're going to talk about one of them today. So we're talking about 1/500th of the world's population of oak trees. Oak trees in general can be long-lived. We generally talk about oak trees being old at 200 to 300 years. There is one tree in California, and how they know this, I don't know. Maybe they took a tiny boring or whatever, but it's been estimated at 1,000 years old, one tree. And bigger doesn't necessarily mean older when it comes to oak trees. If you, and I'll come back to this a little bit, but if you go to Smith Park in Oak Harbor, which is near the intersection of Pioneer and Midway, the little block by block, a lot of those trees are considered quite old, and they're not that big. Most of them are not that big. Oak trees can be either deciduous or evergreen. That means that some of them do not lose their leaves in the fall and winter. The Garry Oak does. The Garry Oak sheds its leaves in the winter and is deciduous. Around the world, the oak can be used for many different purposes. The acorns have a lot of tannin and tannic acid in it. And the tannin can be used to tan leather. And so in days gone by, people would tan leather with the tannins from the oaks. There's a tree called the cork oak, C-O-R-K, and the bark from the cork oak is used for making corks. And so the bark is used for helping wine, not only in making casks out of oak, but using it for corking the bottles. You can divide oak trees many ways, but the most common one is red and white. You've got your red oaks, and they in general are they have dark bark. It's almost black. And the white oaks generally have gray bark. And the Garry Oak, the gray bark, is very furrowed, deeply furrowed, much more than most oak trees. The Garry Oak is a white oak. Another thing about white oaks and red oaks is that the white oaks generally have rounded leaves, and at the end you can take a look at this, but the tips of the leaves are generally rounded, whereas red oaks, they're a little bit more pointed. So today I want to teach you some Latin. Now, when we use botanical or biological names, we use the genus species. And the genus is like the family name, the last name, and the species is like the first name. So instead of me being Lee Roof, I would be Roof Lee. And so when we talk about the Gary oak, we talk about Quercus garryani. So what I want you to do is say the word square. Square. Now say that without the S. Quare. Okay. Quare. And now I want you to say cuss, like you're going to swear. Quercus. Quercus means oak. That's the genus name, Quercus. And garryani is the Gary oak. And it is Garry, not Gary or GE or Jerry. It's Garry. So it's Quercus garryani. And so now you know some Latin. It was named after a guy by the name of Nicholas Gary, who never came to the Northwest. It's kind of like Rainier was named after somebody who never came to the Northwest. Nicholas Gary was the director and the deputy director, later the deputy governor of the Hudson Bay Company at Fort Garry in Canada. Fort Garry is now known as Winnipeg. So the guy who helped direct or form Winnipeg has a tree named for him here on the Northwest. I mentioned before that the Gary oak is deciduous, and it is found pretty much from Northern California, kind of just around the San Francisco Bay Area, up the west coast, west of the Cascades, and up to British Columbia. There are some on Vancouver Island and some on the mainland. There are quite a few in on the islands in the Puget Sound. There are, at one point, the Gary oaks and I want to mention one more thing before I go on to the biology. The Gary oak is also called the Oregon white oak. Of course, they use that term down in Oregon, and we don't want to use Oregon up here, so we call them Gary oaks. But it's the same. It's the same species. At one point, there were a lot of Gary oaks. It's estimated that over 95% of all oak trees, Gary oak trees, have been lost over the years. And that's one of the reasons why this organization that I belong to was formed, was to try to help rehabilitate, save, and then grow more oak trees for the future. One of the prime places for Gary oaks was right here on Pin Cove. The natives used them a lot, and they were all around the cove. And today you can still see a few on the north side of the cove along Pin Cove Road. So if you ever go along Pin Cove Road and you're in the 1400 block, on the north side, that is away from the water, are some massive trees that are beautiful. And on the water side, you can't really see them from the road, but near the bluff are quite a few smaller ones. And unfortunately, they're sloughing off into the sound because of the bluff erosion. The city of Oak Harbor is, of course, named after the pine tree. No. It's estimated that the Gary oak lives about 200 to 400 years. I mentioned the 1,000-year oak down in California. That's not a Gary oak. But it's estimated that the Gary oaks can make it as much as 400 years. They are remarkably resistant to fire, not a raging inferno, but low fire, brush fires, things like that. The oak tree is pretty resistant to that. And the natives would actually use that. They would burn around the oak trees to get rid of the brush so that they could promote the oak trees and help find the acorns. And so they would have controlled burns, much like they kept the Eby's Prairie open by controlled burns in the fall. The natives would burn around the oak trees for the very same reason. The Gary oak has some of the most contorted branches of any of the oak trees. Some of them, if you get up and start looking at them, you can see some amazingly complex and contorted branches. And it is said that Walt Disney was visiting in Canada, in Vancouver area, and saw these, and was so intrigued by this that he used that contorted branch in his movie Snow White. And so the branches that clawed at her dress are based on the Gary oak. The natives use the acorns for food. Now these trees can produce prodigious numbers of acorns. I mean, they can come down by the thousands per tree. And it's a good source of food, but not a good source of good food. So you have to do something to make them palatable. I mentioned the tannins. The tannins and the tannic acid is actually toxic to livestock, not to pigs, but to cattle and horses. And it's not toxic to humans, but it's just so foul-tasting that nobody can stomach it. It's very bitter. The acorns are generally very bitter. And in order to eat them, you have to get rid of the tannins. And the way you do that is you soak them in water. Now, one thing you can do is you can take the whole acorn, get rid of the shell, throw the seed, if you will, into a bucket of water, and rinse it. Keep doing that, and it will take several days, and the tannins will slowly leach out of the acorn. The other thing you can do is you can dice them. You don't want to puree them, but you can dice them, and that will help the process go faster. And so if you ever decide you want to have acorns to eat, you can do that. After you cook them, it's actually fairly sweet. And on the website, I'll refer you to this later, there's a fellow from Bellingham who likes to eat acorns, and he has a little 5-minute video about how to prepare the acorns. And he says it almost has a hint of molasses flavor when you cook these things. The acorns, the natives would roast them, they would make soup, and they would grind them up and make flour and use it to make bread. So the acorns were really quite valuable for the natives. I mentioned the amount of the number of acorns that a tree can produce. What's interesting is it can sometimes be every other year. So you'll have they do produce acorns every year. Some oaks produce only every other year. Gary oaks have a good season and a not so good season. A good season and a not so good season. So last winter or last fall was a good season. And one of these trees in my next door neighbor's yard, it was just walking, you were just stepping on these things and crunching them. And so the natives would harvest those at that time particularly. I mean, that was good eats. The oak wood is used for fires and making tools. It's a very hard wood, as you may know, and so they would make tools out of the wood. And oak chips would be used for smoking, and it's still used today for smoking, though we prefer that you not use Gary oaks for that. The natives also would even use the bark ground up as medicine, and for some reason they seem to think that TB was treated with Gary oak bark. I don't know if it works or not, but that's what they used it for. When the invaders came, when the white man came, the natives were pushed out, and this burning process under the oak trees stopped, and also the oak trees were cut down, used for wood, and so large portions, nearly all of the trees, were eventually cut down. The other thing that happens when you don't burn the brush underneath the trees is that conifers can start to come in. And there's something about conifers that oak trees don't like. They just don't get along too well. And the conifers, the shade, and something about how it changes the soil, and the oak trees don't survive. So when when the conifers come in, you can see the oaks fade away. And a little take-home lesson is you don't want to plant an oak tree near a conifer. Having said that, I have a volunteer oak tree in my front yard. It's about 5 feet tall. When it was about a foot and a half tall, and this was before I knew about oak trees or anything about the organization, I thought, well, that's kind of neat. I'll move that. No. You cannot transplant these things after they've got well established. But it's growing at the base of probably a 3-foot diameter fir tree. So the books say they don't like it, but this one sure does. The trees are very drought tolerant, and that's why they do so well, particularly in the rain shadow here. They do tolerate moist conditions, and if you have moist conditions, they tolerate it quite well, and they will grow faster. And so they don't have to be in dry soil. They can be in moist conditions. They don't want to be in water, but they can be in moist soil. The oak tree is a major species and supports many different forms of wildlife. I could have brought you the list of birds that like the oak tree, but it would double the length of the talk. Many birds like the oak tree. They eat the acorns. The oaks also have a lot of larvae and bugs and stuff, and so the birds go there. The cavities, where an old branch breaks off and will form a cavity, cavity nesters will move in, so the birds really enjoy the oak trees. I mentioned the larvae. There are actually a couple of butterflies that the larvae will eat the oak leaves before they metamorphose into butterflies. The acorns are eaten by bear, deer, raccoons, muskrats, squirrels, and mice in the natural world. So they're very useful that way. And with so many animals eating the acorns, people and all these other animals, you kind of wonder, how can any of these things ever make it? Well, when a tree dumps 2,000 or 3,000 acorns, one of them might make it. And that's not a very high ratio, but if one of them makes it, then that's all it takes to get the next tree going. Talk briefly about the city of Oak Harbor. The city was incorporated in 1915, but it was settled back in the 1850s. There's an old guy named Barrington, and if you know Oak Harbor, there's a road named Barrington. And he and his wife settled the area which now has Smith Park. And he passed away pretty early. His wife hung in there for a while. When she went, her daughter took over. And her daughter, I don't know how this was done because there was no city, but she somehow made it such that the park would be a park forever. So she somehow managed to get Smith Park permanently protected and for public use. I'm blocking on the name of the street, but the next street up from Pioneer Way has been called the Avenue of the Oaks, and if you ever go up there, and you can sometimes see the green street name, and above it is a little brown sign saying Avenue of the Oaks.
It's 8th Street.
8th Street, thank you. And there are quite a few oak trees along there. In the city of Oak Harbor, they also have an ordinance that if an oak tree is greater than 6 feet, you can't cut it down without official permission. So what that's interestingly has done is a lot of people don't want to plant oak trees in Oak Harbor because if it's over 6 feet, then they can't cut it down, and if they want to move it or something like that. And so the organizations found that we have a lot more success in promoting tree growth outside the city limits than in the city limits. The organization as of last year has planted close to 300 trees in the pretty much the North Whidbey area. That ranges from Keystone all the way up to near Deception Pass. They're not only in the city limits. They've got some at Joseph Whidbey State Park. They've got them all over the place.
I'll leave it. There's only about a few weeks left, huh?
One of the things we do is, as I mentioned, is plant these trees, plant the acorns, and we're doing this knowing full well that we won't see the big tree. I mean, if we're lucky, we'll see it, 5 feet tall, maybe taller. But this is for future generations, and it's to try to replace the trees that have been lost over the years. If you're interested, I can give you some information about how to germinate and how to grow acorns into oak trees. I'll just kind of give you a rough walkthrough on how it's done. The acorns are harvested in the fall. You look at them, you pull them out of the little cap, and if they've got a little round hole in them, you throw them away immediately because one of those many bugs and worms that the tree helps support is in there and it won't work. The other thing that you do is you take the acorns and you throw them in water, and if they float, you throw them away. That means that they're not growable, and that's called the float test. Oak trees have very long tap roots, and so if you decide you want to plant them in a pot, you want to put them in a very tall pot like this. And these I planted last winter, and at the bottom I put a little bit of landscaping cloth under there to keep the soil from leaking out the bottom. What it also does is it keeps the roots from coming out of the bottom. One year I did not do that, and I had these in the garden in between the raised beds in the vegetable garden. I picked it up, and the roots were another 6 inches. This is on a 1-year plant, and trying to worm their way into the gravel of the area between the beds. You plant them on their side, and you basically can just lay them on their side right at or just below the surface. You want to pass that around. You can see the acorns still there, and you put them on their side, and the root will grow out one end, and the tree will grow from the other end. And so you've got this now. I put 2 or 3 in a pot because I wasn't very confident that I was going to be successful, and as it turns out, I was very successful because I got 23 out of 24 pots successful.
And are you using just plain planting soil?
I use a mix of sort of natural soil, whatever's around, topsoil in the area, and potting soil.
Okay. Will you plant them, if there's 2 in a pot, will you plant them together, or will you separate them?
Haven't decided yet.
When you say you plant them on the side, you put them like this?
The acorn. The acorn is on the side.
Just the acorn.
Oh, the acorn.
Yeah, the acorn is on its side.
Oh.
Just sprouted.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Got it.
Oh, I see.
And once the seedling's up like this, then you can dig a hole and put them in the hole. And what you do is you dig a hole that's long and deep to take this entire thing, and then you pull it out of the container, and you kind of let most of the soil go somewhere else. You want to plant it in the soil it's going to be in. So I usually use about 1/3 of what's in there and 2/3 of natural soil.
Do they like sandy soil?
They will tolerate sandy soil. The best time to transplant, the best time to transplant is either in the spring, right after they've come up, or in the fall, which is what I generally do. As I mentioned earlier, they don't tolerate the shade from conifers very well, most of them. I've got proof that that's not always the case. The first year after they're in the ground, so if this goes into the ground this fall, next year, 2025, they should be watered fairly regularly. At least a good solid drenching once a month from May to October. That really helps them get established, helps the roots go down, and then after that you don't have to water them. And on year 2, they're on their own. At Del Fairfax Preserve, I don't know if you know where that is, but it's there. We've put in 15 trees up there, and those got watered for the first year only, and after that, and they don't grow fast. I mean, after 4 or 5 years, some of them are only 6 inches tall, but some of them, it's just a freak of nature. Some of them will grow quite rapidly, and you can have them much taller. I was in charge of monitoring trees at Lewick Park in Oak Harbor, and one of the trees, I kept going to the president saying, we got to rip this thing out. This thing's just not doing anything, and we're wasting our time. This year, the thing shot up about 3 feet. So you never know what's going to happen when they do this. Another way to get them started is to take the acorns, do the float test, throw them in a plastic bag with some peat moss, moist peat moss, and throw them in the refrigerator. And watch them. If they get moldy, you want to throw them away, but generally they do okay. And then when they sprout a root, after 2 or 3 inch root, then you can put that in the soil, and they'll take off from there. The other way you can do it is you can plant them where you want them. You can put the acorns in the ground where you want the tree. And I did that on 2 trees up at Del Fairfax. This last winter, this last year, 2 of the trees just never made it, and I took it upon myself to try to get 2 trees in there. And I didn't want to go out there with a shovel and haul all that stuff. And so I said, well, I'll just put in some acorns. And I got little styrofoam pieces of cooler tops, and put the acorns in the ground just right at the surface, on their side, right at the surface, a little bit under the surface. I put one an inch down, one right below the surface, and right at the surface. And out of 6 acorns, I put down 3 germinated. I kept them under this styrofoam thing during the coldest part of the winter, and I'm glad I did, because it got real cold last night. It was 14 degrees at my house one morning. And fortunately, I had done that because some of the other people in our organization had planted these in their pots outside, and they lost every one of them. It was just too cold. Now comes the fun part: rabbits and deer. I mentioned earlier that these animals really like acorns, and they love fresh plants, and so. I do 2 things. The organization has these real fancy, expensive cages that they build, and I'm too cheap for that. So I've done a different system. First of all, you want to get something like a fine hardware cloth like this. 1/4 inch is fine, 1/2 inch is okay. And you want to make a round container, and you want to sink that about 1 inch into the soil right around where the plant is going to be. And that's to try to keep the rabbits and the voles from getting to it. And then, after a year or so, when it starts to grow up high enough, then I put a large cage, 5 feet tall, with this 2x4 fencing material. And I just make a round cage, take the ends, bend them over, put a couple stakes in the ground so it's stable, and I walk away from it. I have one tree that I put in one of my former patients, when I retired, said, "Lee, I want you to plant a tree in my son's honor." She had lost her son. And I thought, well, I'm going to plant an oak tree. So I found a place over in Mount Vernon that sells full-grown Gary oaks. I brought it home and I put this thing around there. And it's been 5 years, and the tree is slowly growing up and out of this thing. And eventually, when it's about 7, 8 feet tall, if I'm still around, I can take that cage off. Now, the other thing the deer like to do is they like to rub their antlers on it in the fall. And that can destroy one of these young trees. And so you'll sometimes see in Oak Harbor, if you look at some of these trees, they've put fence posts, these green fence posts, 3 or 4 around each tree. And it's just to discourage the deer from getting in real close to try to rub their antlers up against it.
Lee, I know that they hate the feeling of the metal post. So if you use metal as opposed to wood, it deters the deer antlers.
Okay, everyone hear that? Metal posts? Great, thanks, Neil. So that is pretty much what I have to say. I hope I didn't go on too long. Again, places to see these in Oak Harbor along 8th Avenue, Smith Park, north side of Penn Cove. These are very easy places to see them, and they're being planted all over the area as well. Yes?
2 questions. How big are they at maturity? And do they care if they're in the sun or shade?
Do they?
Care if they're in the sun or the shade?
They prefer sun.
They prefer sun.
They are quite large. Probably the most beautiful oak tree on the island is on Monroe Landing Road, just south of the airport. There's a field out there, and way across the field you see this gorgeous tree, and it's huge. It's probably 60 feet, 70 feet tall, and it's perfectly symmetrical, and it's just absolutely gorgeous. So if you're ever in the neighborhood just south of the airport, you can look off in the field.
So on the right-hand side, on the side where the airport is?
Yes,
Lee,
yes.
is that Arnold Road? You talking about the Lehman's place?
No,
Oh,
I'm talking about on Monroe Landing Road.
Okay.
The field after you,
After.
between Arnold Road and the airport,
Yeah.
on the right side, several hundred yards away.
okay.
You can see it from there. It's just a gorgeous tree.
There are another couple on Arnold Road that are beautiful.
Oh yeah, there are. And I mentioned earlier Penn Cove Road, their side.
The tree that's in the middle of the Lehman property
Yeah.
with the
Yes.
sheep, is that an oak?
Yes,
Is that a Gary oak?
yes,
Yeah.
that's the one he's referring to.
Yeah.
Yes.
Both of them.
South of Coopville, by Morris Road is an organization called Pacific Rim Institute.
Mhm.
And they, I don't know if they still do, but they had a project of trying to propagate and grow Gary oaks. And there's an area there where they've done kind of a memorial tree for people that have been involved in the development.
Yeah, I am not aware of where that stands now, but yes, that organization has been central in propagating trees on their property.
Lee, I can answer that. We established 2 patches of oak savannas, one by the corner of Morris and near the highway, okay? But the really nice one is in the opposite end of the property. And actually, we had a controlled burn there about 5 or 6 years ago, and that was pretty dramatic. But those trees are thriving amongst their prairie relatives. So it's quite a beautiful sight. Anybody can go out there and walk the land. That's A-OK.
Everyone hear that? Yeah. Yes.
So fire is advantageous to these trees, but fire can be a problem if it, is it well controlled? Is there another way to keep the ground healthy for the trees?
I wouldn't be able to answer that. I'm sorry.
I stumped the panel.
You stumped the chump.
Probably mowing. You want to keep down the other competing woody plants. So it's just like an orchard, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So if we were to take home these Gary Oaks, you said fall is the best time to plant.
Mhm.
So just keep them watered and where they are and then plant them in fall?
Yeah, I mean, fall is getting pretty close.
I know.
Yeah. Yesterday I was going,
Wait,
We had the-
what month is it?
we had the fans on yesterday. Why are we looking at the heat tonight? Yes.
Yeah, with your permission, I wonder if I could use the mic? Yeah, thank you. It's hard to hear the questions around the corner, and I struggle particularly. Anyway, I wanted to ask you about boat building in the Gary Oak. And this ties into a museum. Tug is his nickname, is going to do a reenactment down there in the water off the wharf in a vintage kind of a boat. And he has a particularly interesting theory about Oak Harbor, that because of the Gary Oak tree, that there was actually a month long or so, month and a half long sojourn in Oak Harbor in the year 1803, which greatly precedes anything that we ever thought was, going on in terms of settlement around here. The thesis being that these people aboard a boat, they were fur traders, saw signs of there being oak in the area. They found leaves, supposedly, on the water. They traced down where those oak remnants were coming from, and it turned out to be today's Oak Harbor. So my question again is anything that you may know about in the literature, the lore, about building boats with Gary Oak as a wood? Okay. I will tell you this, I'm aware of one source, and that's Peggy Darce Townsend's book, where she talks about her long ago relative, Captain Barrington, who built the first ship and the only ship built in Oak Harbor, and she specifically cites Gary Oak as being the only wood named that he used. I'm sure he used other wood, because it's unusual to build around here a boat with solid oak. But anyway, it was used for repair in this instance.
Right.
And Delva, if you want to tell people when this event is
Yeah,
for
this
Busey.
Saturday afternoon on the wharf from 1 to 6 p.m. Tug's going to have his historic skiff parked right there on the wharf, and he's got an authentic reproduction sailor's outfit from the 1950s, and he is going to reenact being a sailor on the Massachusetts who did come here, in the 1850s. So he's got some wonderful historic artifacts to show, and he can answer a lot of questions. He's very knowledgeable about maritime culture in the 1800s.
So again, this Saturday from 1 to 6 down here on the waterfront.
Thank you.
Great.
So is it going to be that length of time, or can you just go in
Oh,
and
you
out?
can just come and go, yeah. No,
All
he's
day
just gonna
repeated?
be there all day, yeah.
I have a question.
Yes.
At what age do they start producing the acorns?
About 20 years.
Did you repeat the question?
What age do the trees start to produce acorns? At 20 years, if you're lucky. Yeah, 20 years if you're lucky.
Be 92. Around my tree.
The organization's website, ohgarryoaksociety.org. They have they've got a couple little videos there, including the one I mentioned from the fellow who likes to eat the acorns, and information about the organization. Shameless Commerce Division will ask for donations. The organization is all volunteer organization. And if anyone is interested, I've got oak trees to sell here today, $15. I'm sorry, only cash. I don't have any ability to take anything other than cash or check. And you're more than welcome to take them. The question earlier was that most of these actually have 2 trees in there. And if you wanted to try to tease them apart and plant 2, that would be fine. You don't want to plant them too close together, but certainly if you wanted to put both in the ground and then sacrifice the slow one, you could certainly do that. Any other questions?
Well, I can attest to them being hardy. My husband ran over mine with the lawnmower, and I dug them up, put them in a pot, and then he got leaves the next year, and then the deer ate the leaves off, and I put it further back in the deck so they couldn't get it, and the leaves came out again, and I planted it in the fall, and it's about this tall now.
You got a survivor there.
Yeah, it wants to live.
Any other questions?
Lee, what elevation above sea level do these generally grow? I mean, do they grow over 5,000 feet?
I don't know how high up they go. They are generally considered more of a lowland tree, but I don't know how high. Your place is below 5,000 feet, if I recall.
218. No, the reason I asked is, years ago I bought Douglas fir from the state, and they asked specifically what elevation I was going to plant them at. And I asked why, and they said they do best if the trees come from an elevation within 2,000 feet of where you're putting them. So it has something to do with genetics. I'm not sure.
These are from a tree that's about 90 feet up sea level.
90 feet?
90 feet. Just up on those bluffs over there.
Huh?
It could be risky for you.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you.